Welcome to Health and Safety Conversations. Here's your host, Tom Bourne.
Hi, and welcome to Health and Safety Conversations. I'm your host, Tom Bourne, and with me today is the awesome Ken Bloch. Ken, how are you?
I'm doing good, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Oh, fantastic. Ken, I know a little bit about you because I've done some research and I've been interested in the work you've done. But for those who don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about your background, what you're currently doing?
Yeah, sure. Right now, I work for a major petrochemical company in the Houston, Texas area of USA. I got my start about 36 years ago. I think 1986, I started working in a carbon black plant when I was still in college, my second year in college. And ever since then, I've been connected in one way or another with gainful employment in the hydrocarbon and chemical processing industries. My big break really came in 1999 when I hired on with a company, a real refinery in Minnesota, and went to work for them. It was a great learning experience, and I started out as a water treatment specialist, a reliability engineer. Water treatment specialist was my title, and I had a really great supervisor. His name was Jim Simon, and he saw something in me that he liked as far as my ability to do root cause failure analysis. Mm-hmm. And we really solved a lot of problems on the water treatment systems. And he sent me on a bet. He sent me to some advanced training with really with more of a fine tuning and the formal approach to solving problems that we encounter in the hydrocarbon processing industry. And so I put that to use, and ever since then, I've really been focused on investigations, helping my employer understand things that are important to us, not only as a company, but also as an industry. And so that's pretty much in a nutshell what I'm doing. I'm in process safety now. I'm a process safety supervisor. And so I still get involved a lot in investigations and the 14 elements of process safety from the OSHA PSM regulation, mechanical integrity, management of change, you name it, auditing. I do it all now.
Excellent. All right. One of the reasons I got you on, besides your extensive health and safety background, process safety, was because of your interest and your past research into a particular incident that happened. Incident's a loose word we could use for it. It's about the Bhopal disaster in India. Now, this happened in the night of the 2nd and the 3rd of December, 1984. My concern, as I'm getting older is, and I am getting older, unfortunately, is I'm seeing a whole new range of safety professionals come through, a whole new range of people in industry who either haven't heard about it or it seems to be convenient for everyone to forget about it. And I don't think we should. I think we owe it to the people who were affected by this to keep it fresh in our mind so that we have a point in time to say, this is what happens when things go wrong, when things aren't managed properly. And if you look at the literature and the the general understanding of the public about the incident compared to, say, something like Piper Alpha, they're chalk and cheese. And yet you have a scale difference that's incredible. Now, why do you think it's important that people should remember Bhopal and what actually happened?
Tom, you really nailed it. I think actually, the fear that I have is many of the engineers and safety professionals that are entering the workforce today have not really familiarized themselves, nor have they been taught about where process safety as we know it globally started, which is right there in Bhopal, India. And there's a number of reasons for that. And one of the things too, I got involved in a conversation years ago with somebody, and it was just one of these professional conferences, and their company really does not want to talk about it. It's a big company in the refining industry, because they don't feel like there's really anything to learn from it. And sadly, that like you mentioned, the public opinion, I think that does, unfortunately, that kind of impression is what remains. But really, it is important, right? It is important that we remember it, because there's so much to learn from it. And one of the things that brought it to where it is in many people's minds today is that it's just like anybody else, in today. And it was the same way in 1984, where you've got a big company and there's a big, very public disaster, an accident. And immediately, the first thing that happens is a hold order goes into effect, a legal hold. And that definitely was the case in Bhopal. Now, there's nothing sinister or reckless about that, but it's because some of the investigations that I do, I am under legal hold as well. It's really the employer saying, be careful with the information that you have, because we expect this to go to court, and that's the right place for us to discuss this information, where it can be analyzed and discussed. And so there's a process you follow, right? And that's indeed what happened immediately with Union Carbide and the Bhopal disaster. But the problem is, like you said, the enormity of it, people wanted answers. And so unfortunately, those answers never came, because Union Carbide settled out of court, and when things are settled out of court, there's no responsibility to let any information out in the public. Yeah. And so what happened then is people start putting together things that make sense to them, and you get into the situation. I'm sure that many of your listeners, and perhaps you even yourself, have heard of The Black Swan by Nassim Nicholas Taleb.
Yeah.
Nassim Nicholas Taleb, NNT. And he goes through this process. I read that book, and one thing I learned about it from the get-go was that I'm really not interested in philosophy, because it's a book on philosophy, but there were really some good nuggets in that book. And one of them that I took away was falsification. Okay. And it's this process you go through where you have a plane falling out of the sky, and it falls, into bits and pieces in the Everglades. And then you get, an investigator who has to piece those things together and explain exactly what happened, because it's important, and air safety is important, right? Mm-hmm. Well, process safety is important too. And you can't go about a disaster of this magnitude with a little bit of information, facts, and then use it to kind of generate an explanation for what happened. So like, for example, this refrigeration system that was part of their safety system, as well as, it also performed a process function, but it was critical for the safety of this plant. It had been disabled. And that was a fact. That was a fact that came out early, but nobody ever explained why. The why never came out, not from Union Carbide or the other company involved, Union Carbide India Limited, two separate companies. They were partners, but neither side said why it was disabled. And so why do big companies disable things? Well, it must be because they want to save money. Doesn't everybody want to save money?
Absolutely.
I mean, yeah, it's a basic law of life. It's a principle we live by, right? I mean, we learned that if we spend more than we make, first thing happens is our banks get angry at us, and then we're probably going to face some legal action ourselves, right? If we don't pay our bills. But but in the case of the Bhopal disaster, it left this impression that you're dealing with a reckless company who was not interested in safety and was willing to save 20 some odd dollars a day and put countless lives at risk. And there's no proof of that. And in fact, if you use this process that we're talking about, where you prove what something is by doing your best to prove what it is not. And what you do is, you start out with a theory and you brainstorm and you start out with a theory. Why did these guys disable the refrigeration system? And then you continue to use your evidence to take away anything that doesn't belong. And what you come out with is some credible and amazing explanations that put you right in the middle of it. You're in the room making a decision that you think is the right choice, but you have no idea what the future is going to be like and how bad that decision was. And those are the kind of things we're talking about if you really take the time to look at underneath what the Bhopal disaster really represents.
Yeah. Now, you've written a book, Rethinking Bhopal. How did that come about? That's the book.
That's the book. You can get it on Amazon or the Elsevier website.
Beautiful.
And I should also mention that the book is also it's almost like two books in one. The first half of it really is an investigation method that I just kind of touched on, that uses falsifiability or falsification. I call it falsifiability in the book, but it's really what NNT referred to as falsification. Anyway, the book came about really because I had been asked by a supervisor of mine who and this was in like mid 2010. My boss was assigned a chairman's role on an upcoming symposium for the Center for Chemical Process Safety, and he was trying to solicit papers, and one of them was just fundamentals of process safety fundamentals. And what I came up with was an idea where there's inside of both. I thought, well, here's my idea. I thought if I could take the system, at this time I was doing HAZOPs, hazard and operability studies, and I thought if I could do a HAZOP on some anonymous system with a group of people who I've worked with before in these HAZOP meetings, engineers, operators, the typical people who will come in, machinists, mechanics, and that kind of thing, and assist you with that. If I could get them together, and I was thinking, it'll be a Saturday afternoon, we will take a node, and the node will be not known to them, but the MIC tank system in Bhopal, and we just go through this line by line and figure out, okay, if these processes had existed before the disaster, would we have come across something that would make us go back to the drawing board and fix some things before construction? Mm-hmm. Because by today's standards, which didn't exist back then, the process safety systems that became unified as a result of the Bhopal disaster, they didn't exist, unfortunately, in 1984. So if we're putting all of our confidence in them now, let's just take this simple system, go through a HAZOP, and then we'll present the findings at this conference. So my boss liked that idea, but as now I was going through it in preparation for this meeting that we were going to have, I noticed I started out with what I had already was the drawing of the tank, and it's included it's in the public domain. It's in the official investigation report that Union Carbide published after the disaster. And there's a page that shows the tank and the pumps and all the connections and everything. And there's two pumps on the tank. There's a circulation pump which processed MIC, methyl isocyanate, through the tank and through the cooler, the refrigeration system. But there's also a transfer pump, which its sole purpose was to take the material in the tank and put it into the production area. So now you're able to move that material where you want to be able to produce. And so I had that drawing, that diagram. Credible source came from the official investigation report, and then but then you have to really understand maybe a little bit more about how it operates. Okay, well, how does this system operate? And so I just did some web searches, and I came across a paper, large magnitude incidents by A.S. Kalikar, and it's also available on Union Carbide's website that they have for the Bhopal disaster. And there's a page there that explains how the system worked. And the system worked by pressurizing the tank up to 14 psig with nitrogen, and then that made it possible to move the MIC out of the tank and into the production area. And so I'm looking at the drawing with the pumps, and I'm reading this description of how the process operated, and you have a contradiction, because the reason that you have a pump on a tank, and you're not going to put a pump on a tank if you don't need it, is to move the material out. But then you have this other credible report saying nothing about pumps, but they're doing it pneumatically and pressurizing the material out, and building a sufficient pressure to move it out through pressure differential. And so at that point, the hairs on the back of your head kind of go up. If you're an investigator, you found something that, there's a reason that this disparity exists.
Yep.
And as you start digging into it, you're either going to just get an explanation and say, okay, I understand, or else you're going to be able to dig deeper and find more and more information that explains more than what you thought you might know at that moment. But either way, you don't leave that stuff alone, and you dig in it. And essentially, the book is a discussion about the evidence that was located after finding that discrepancy and trying to explain it. And really, with that information, it's again a message that you can put yourself in. It's not something that you don't have control over, like that conversation that I had originally with another industry peer where there's nothing to learn. You can put yourself into these situations every single day. In fact, we do.
Yeah. So what did you learn? What did you learn as a result of investigating it a bit further, besides the discrepancy with the pump and how they're actually distributing the material? What else did you find once you started digging a bit deeper?
Well, you can call it a defect, but defects are usually something that are unintended. But there was a decision made early on that instead of building the Bhopal plant to the specification put out by Union Carbide, which was anything in methyl isocyanate service had to be at least stainless steel, at least, or better. Okay. And the reason that is because MIC is an amazing chemical. This carbaryl manufacturing process started out with a chloroformate. It's called the chloroformate route, but it wasn't methyl isocyanate. Methyl isocyanate was not one of the intermediates. But the problem with the original chemistry was that it was inefficient. It made a great product. I mean, this carbaryl was the solution to DDT, which was outlawed in the United States. It was banned in 1972. And so, this product was, no surprise, one the greatest chemical manufacturer on the face of the planet at that time comes up with a solution. And, we're able to continue having the prosperous way of life, the standard of living that this DDT made possible without all the negative effects, including wildlife and even human mortality. It was bad stuff. but carbaryl was a replacement that was safe, right? And so anyway, the beautiful thing about methyl isocyanate, MIC, was that it was so reactive. You didn't have to put any energy into it to make it react. You just have to bring it in contact with something else, and suddenly it does what it's supposed to do. And so it was energy efficient. There was minimal waste involved. It was really a solution to a waste problem that came up with the first generation process. But the thing about methyl isocyanate is that it's a phosgene derivative, and phosgene, of course, it's familiar to a lot of people because even in industry today, there's when there's a phosgene release and you're exposed to it, typically the results aren't good. But it was also a weapon used in chemical warfare, and so it's a poison. It's bad stuff. But the difference between phosgene is a gas at room temperature. Yep. And at room temperature, although MIC is highly volatile, it's a liquid. And so your brain is thinking that MIC is easily handled, because if you release it, it just doesn't disperse like phosgene does, but still it's dangerous. But the thing about the reactivity is that MIC reacts with many things, probably most things, I would say. Water is one of them, but it also reacts with rust, and therefore, like we were saying, it was very clear that the design spec for anything in MIC service was stainless steel or better. Yep. Because that got rid of the iron oxide. You wouldn't rust, and it was an inherently safe alternative. It was inherent safety at its finest. The Bhopal plant was built with mild steel or iron, and not stainless steel, just material that will rust if exposed to air. And you have this very tropical environment that it's being built in. It consisted of just normal iron on the vapor systems only. So the tank was stainless steel, but the vent headers that were going from the tank into the air management system, or the vapor management system, including the lines going over to the vent gas scrubber, those were all just regular steel, not stainless steel. So why did they do that? Well, again, it's really interesting. If you look at the tank drawing, you can see what I mean. But nitrogen was part of the air management system as well, and it was constantly being fed into the tank. Yep. Out through the vapor system, clearing out the headspace and carrying whatever remnants or trace amount of MIC was in this vapor space in the tank out to the vent gas scrubber, where it was removed by the vent gas scrubber. And the vent gas scrubber, what was the purpose for it? It was a pollution control system. So I just have to mention again, one of these misconceptions is that the reason that Union Carbide built the Bhopal factory in a third world nation, and definitely in its infancy in terms of its industrialization compared to the U.S., was because of the lax and relaxed regulations, the regulatory framework. And really, that's not true. That might be true, that the maturity of that framework couldn't compare to what you would get in the United States at that time. But you can look at the design and see that they included everything needed to be responsible, right? But the decision was made to construct the vapor management system with this lower grade material. And what that did was it created a dependency on nitrogen. At this point, if you lost that nitrogen, now in the industrial world, and for people who don't understand that, one of the ways that we protect equipment and preserve it is to create this inert atmosphere. And what you do is you get the air out, and instead you encapsulate it with nitrogen. And since the air is not there, it can't rust. And so, one of the engineers on the Bhopal project said, well, why are we going with this more expensive stainless steel? We can save, I don't know, a couple $1,000s at least if we just take advantage of the nitrogen. It will not rust. The inside of the pipes will not rust. And the reason that's important is because if the inside of the pipes rust, then if you have this MIC gas, and the MIC gas will, it's going to evaporate. If that's going through those lines, you're going to form what's called trimer, and it's a solid white plasticky material that would form when MIC contacts rust. Rust would be the catalyst in that case. Mm-hmm. And you clog up the pipes. And if you clog up the pipes, guess what you got to do? You got to clean them out.
Yeah.
And there you have the water washing too. Water washing was never part of the original intent for that process, but because they had problems and they ended up interrupting nitrogen feed on a continuous basis to deal with another problem, they were having to flush the pipes out regularly to keep them clean.
Yeah.
Those are just some of the things that you learn. Again, this whole thing just kind of comes together with credible explanations, and not just, well, they were trying to save money. Well, they were trying to, build in a place where they wouldn't be held to the same accountability. No, there's things in there. Like I said, if you understand, you can put yourself as somebody who walks into a factory today, you can put yourself in that situation and say, am I going to be the person who raises a concern because this might lead to something that we will regret in the future?
Yeah. So they didn't take into account the fact that nitrogen, the process of having nitrogen in the pipes, could be interrupted at some stage?
Well, it's interesting, Tom, because they did have redundancy in the system to prevent that from happening from a design perspective. But when you have a problem that prevents you from feeding the nitrogen continuously that you've voluntarily accepted to deal with another problem, then it's you do your best to manage it, and that's what they did. So a lot of the things that came across, again, these facts that came out as being kind of like reckless, were all things going back to, how do I manage this situation that I have to manage? And in this case, it was worker safety. It was worker and public safety, because these pumps that we're talking about, this transfer pump and the circulation pump that were original design on the tank in the system, they were failing quite frequently. And every time they failed and had a pump seal leak, that would be, somebody would have to go out there and isolate the pump and be exposed to MIC, and it was making people sick.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. I'd heard that actually been quite regular small releases of phosgene, some of which would send people off to hospital. Mm-hmm. I believe at one stage there, while senior management of Union Carbide was at the site, there was a small leak which sent 16 workers off to hospital. Mm. Okay, if we've got these warning signs happening, and this is what basically it is, we're having small incidents constantly happening, which basically says there's a problem with the system. Why, in your opinion, do you think that nothing was done to, I don't know, rectify the situation, examine the problem and see what the situation really was?
That's a really good question. And I think, for anybody who still has the privilege of meeting, somebody who worked for Union Carbide, when Union Carbide was still a company, you recognize that a lot of people wanted to work for Union Carbide because they hired the best people. I mean, they were very competitive when it came to snatching up talent, and I can identify at least one problem where they just didn't understand. The effort was there, but the solution wasn't. They didn't understand how to solve the problem that was causing these pumps to fail so frequently. And in fact, that it's really interesting. The event that you talked about, where it sent 16 people, there's varying numbers. Nobody's really too sure, but it was definitely between 16 and 25 workers. It was a catastrophic failure. It was on January 9th, 1982. And what they found was that one of the mechanics had put a rogue material in the pump, the seal. It was when they took it out of service and checked, why did this fail so catastrophically? They found that a ceramic material seal had been put in, and the specification on that pump was again stainless steel. And so that's where things actually got kind of combative within the factory between management, and it had been cooperative up to that point. Many problems, but they were working together to solve them. But then management accused a worker for putting that rogue material in, and you can kind of understand why somebody might be driven to do that if they feel like it's going to maybe solve the problem. Ceramic material, not going to rust. Maybe that's the problem. But again, if it's a force related failure mechanism, that thing's going to break apart pretty quickly. And the workers were accused of sabotage at that point. They could not solve that problem. They tried for many years, since the plant was commissioned, to diagnose and figure out the problem with the pumps. But there's no information available that suggests that they ever did. And so instead of solving the problem, which they couldn't do, they resorted to disabling them. They turned them off.
Mm. Yeah. Now, okay. On the night of the incident in 1984, what were the events that unfolded?
By that time, the plant was out of business. It had come down involuntarily, and the original staff that was there had dispersed. There was no more money. They weren't getting paid, and it was living out its final days leading up to January 1st, 1985, which is when the operating license that the factory was operating under would expire, and it wasn't going to be renewed. And so there was a skeleton crew there, and workers from the battery factory, which was also owned by Union Carbide India Limited, were staffing the plant. And what happened was it just kind of started out as a normal night. They did not have feed out of tank E610 because they couldn't get pressure in it because the valve was leaking. Mm-hmm. And everything seemed normal right about up to shift change. And shortly after shift change, shortly after 11 o'clock p.m., during rounds on the tank, one of the workers noticed that the pressure was at 10 psig. And that wasn't outside, let's say, normal. But things started to really unfold quickly at that point. And unfortunately, they knew something was wrong because they were sensing it in the plant. They could smell MIC vapor, but they weren't sure where it was coming from. And then one of the workers noticed, and this is close to midnight, right about midnight, that the ground out at the tanks were covered by a concrete. They were encased in concrete. It was a concrete deck, and there was a lot of rumbling in the tank, and the pipes were hot to the touch. And shortly after that, the pressure valve opened, And at that point, you're releasing MIC because of the state of the system that's been partially dismantled at this point in preparation for being demoed because it was not going to be in service anymore after January 1st, 1985. And it was chaotic. The workers did everything they could to suppress what was happening, but unfortunately the reaction had gone beyond the point of no return by that time.
Yeah. Do you think the system was too complex for the workers left, as they said, a skeleton crew, to understand what to actually do to try and control the emergency?
Tom, I think there's a good lesson in that you never underestimate the enormity of an industrial process, because what you think, this is simple, straightforward. All you have to do are follow these simple steps, and we're going to be converting this material. We're taking it, driving it out of the tank, and we're going to make pesticide with it. Sounds simple, but there's all kinds of complexities, and that's something. That's one of the things too that I think we as an industry we need to recognize, or it's very clear that again, your mind will convince you that everything dealing with mechanics, chemicals, energy, it's all very sanitary, it's all very academic, it's all very controllable, and nothing should go wrong. And so when I love going to conferences where I hear people who are college professors, smart people, and they explain how an industrial process operates, and half the time, if not more, I walk away saying, this person has never stepped foot inside a refinery. And, why do we want to work? Why do good people still, some of them still want to work, even though it's not as glamorous anymore? Why do people still want to go to work in a chemical plant or a refinery? It's because they like solving problems. And if everything really worked that way, where, you got these chemicals, and chemicals are unlike people, where they don't have to go up and go to Starbucks every morning and get their coffee to put them in a good mood. You just put them together, and under these circumstances, poof, you get what you know you're going to get, because there's no guesswork. But for some reason, when we go into a large manufacturing operation, we are always busy trying to figure out why this isn't working the way we expect it to. And it's a really fulfilling, rewarding career for most people who work there, because it's always going on. So there's a lot of things that we need to train people on, and prepare them for, when it comes to not underestimating the enormity of any operation that we're undergoing, and not just saying, don't worry about it, nothing can go wrong, you'll be safe, right? Everything, as long as there's material going through the pipes, you need to be on top of things and aware of not what you expect, but the things that you don't expect.
Yeah. Do you think that being able to either solve small problems on a regular basis successfully gives a sense of or makes people more complacent to the bigger issues that may happen for when things go terribly pear-shaped?
Tom, let's talk about Union Carbide again. They did not get to the point where they were. I want to say that they were the most successful. Their competitors hated them because they pushed the envelope, right? And they were so good. It's like we can't live with DDT, but we can't live without it. So now all of the big chemical manufacturers are going to their laboratories trying to figure out, well, what are we going to do? What can we do to replace this material? And is it any wonder that Union Carbide is the one that cracked the code and was able to bring something into the market that was a solution. We and I say we as people are always pushing ourselves to go beyond, and Union Carbide is a great example of that company that was successful in doing that. And they were so used to solving problems and having the success that comes along with it, that I do think, and again, this is just a personal impression that I was left upon doing this research, that they were kind of numb to some of the realities of operating a little bit differently in India. And I do think that came back. One of the things came back to bite them in this case. One of the things to recognize again is that Union Carbide. There's a lot of discussion about like Coca-Cola and IBM when the government of India put in restrictions that were really going to penalize foreign-owned businesses right around this time. And Union Carbide said, "No, we're in it for the long haul. We will be here." But what you got to understand is that Union Carbide marketed their materials consistently by going the patent route. And if you know anything about patents, you disclose everything. You say, "Here's how we do it." And for the distribution of this knowledge that I've entered into industry, we will experience manufacturing privileges, and we will, we have good lawyers, and we will sue people who try to copy our formulations, our products, because what's the risk? Well, there's not really a risk when the technology is going so fast that by the time your patent runs out, you've got something else to replace it that's even better, right? Which again was the track record for Union Carbide. But here they are now. Why did all these companies with trade secrets like Coca-Cola and IBM decide to leave India? It's because they were going to have to tell their secrets to somebody else because they were trade secrets. They did not go the patent approach. And again, these are just little things, that like you just brought up, just little things that made them numb to the realities of doing business a little bit differently. They were not used to competing in the commodity market, which is essentially what drove them into manufacturing overseas in India.
Yeah. All right. Do you think that perhaps one of the issues was Union Carbide America, Union Carbide India, there was a lack of perhaps oversight of either the maintenance crews, the workers, the process setup, the materials used, and it was just assumed that the minimum standards that Union Carbide imposed in America would be duplicated in India?
I don't think so, Tom. Not really. Union Carbide India Limited, UCIL, really counted on Union Carbide and the folks who were in the headquarters to help them make the right decisions. Mm-hmm. But again, going back to this, somewhat comfortableness in the way you do business and the amount of success that you've had. Let's talk about things like, again, now MOC is done much different than it is. Management of change is done much different than it was back then, but there was still, companies still had kind of a form that they would follow. So this gets back to when a decision was being made in India and they would have to check with central engineering, which was in the United States with Union Carbide headquarters. If these were things that were okay, Union Carbide very rarely, I don't know of any case where they actually said, "No, you can't do that." Okay. And I think that's, again, one of the things that, you can learn from this is that it's sometimes not easy to say no. And sometimes things sound like a good idea. When somebody comes to you and says, "Is it okay if we design this piping system, just MIC vapor, not MIC liquid, with a reduced quality of steel, because we're going to take advantage of the nitrogen, are you going to say yes to that? Even though, it's in design specs, but are you going to say, we'll give you a waiver, we'll write an exception for this case, you can do that? Because I see you're thinking it through, and it's going to say money, or are you going to say, we can't do that? You're going to design it to spec. Now's the time for us to spend money on this. The money's available. Let's go ahead and design it the way we specified it. But like I said, I think that in this particular relationship, there wasn't a really good checks and balance. There weren't good checks and balances. There was more of, I think we've got a good idea, and there were smart people. Again, these engineers in India for UCIL were very smart individuals. And Union Carbide, the owner of the technology, had a hard time saying no. And again, I'm not criticizing that, because I think that's what we learned from this. I think, again, having the fortitude and the courage to say no is something that goes a long way in this business in general. And again, examples like the one we're talking about here hopefully give people, a leg to stand on when those situations come up, and they will come up.
Yeah, look, I don't know. I think for you, Kenneth, for example, if a manager or supervisor came to you and said, I know this isn't the way it's supposed to be done, but we can do it, I'm pretty sure you'd actually say, well, you're going to have to give me some pretty solid evidence why we're even bothering to reinvent the wheel that actually works. We've got a system that we know is safe. Why are we tampering with it? Why are we potentially making problems for ourselves?
Yeah.
All right.
Those are good things to think about before you actually get into that situation. How are you going to handle that? Because they will come up.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. After your investigation, you must have some opinion. You must have some opinion as to the underlying causes of why this incident happened. If you were to give a brief description, because we don't want to steal all the thunder from the book, why do you think the incident happened?
So the book does discuss that, and there is actually, again, if you know what to look for and where to find it, and there's a reference in the book, you can find it, but it's very obscure. It did come out in a court discussion. I think it was in the 1990s in New York City. But there was something found, again, through this falsification process. You come up with a theory, and it's really interesting. And all I'll say is that I encourage people to go to my LinkedIn account, because there's a series of 4 technical articles that I published for people who just wanted kind of like the Reader's Digest version of some of the main points. And the 4th installment, this was done, by the way, it was sponsored by the Bhopal Medical Appeal, and they're really great people there in the UK, Tim Edwards and others that I'm thankful they trust me enough to work with me, and they publish these on their website as well. But you can go there and take a look at them, and you can read for yourself, and the answer's there. But I would like to say, that there's 2 prevailing theories, right? That everybody talks about. There's the water washing theory, and there's this sabotage theory. Mm-hmm. And what's really fascinating about it is that it's really both the same. That if you really understand the context, it's just one side's version of what happened and what they attribute it to. And so, what I always ask people is, in your experience, have you ever seen one of these catastrophic disasters, whether it's Chernobyl, whether it's the Bhopal disaster, whether it's Hyper Alpha, whether it's Pasadena in 1989, where it was just one thing? Somebody just came up and decided to do something mischievous that day, it's usually a much bigger picture. It always is.
Yeah.
There's so many other things, but what's fascinating about it is you can either one of them, if you don't really understand what happened, just depending on who's telling the story, you can say that person is right.
Yeah. What was for those who don't know, and this is one of the reasons why, as I said, I don't think we should forget Bhopal at all. I think it should be there in the front of our mind when we're designing systems and maintaining them. What was the outcome of Bhopal? How many people were affected by this disaster?
So officially, the count within the first 24 hours was a little over 3,800. Nobody's really quite sure, as far as the first 24 hours, because you have to understand that, this is a very close-knit area. Families live together and that sort of thing. And the enormity of this disaster and the totality of it wiped out entire families. In fact, there was maybe nobody to claim bodies or to give an account of people who were missing and that kind of thing. However, the ongoing disaster, unfortunately, unlike Chernobyl, where it's been encased and it's still a problem, but there's been a lot of effort into remediation and minimizing the ongoing lasting effect. The Bhopal factory still sits there. It's still sitting there in a much deteriorated state, but much of the chemicals that were there on the night of December 3rd, the morning of December 3rd, are still there. There's definitely evidence of birth defects and ongoing impact, and the last mortality figures that I saw from non-governmental agencies is up in the 25,000s now.
Yeah. The figures I heard for just ongoing health effects is there could be something like 500,000 people who are suffering severe long-term health effects. And I still believe the water in the area is unable to be drunk, which is from 1984. You're looking at what's that close? Well, we're getting close to 40 years now. Yeah, it's not the fact that there is those chemicals still on site in a deteriorating facility. Is that likely to cause further incidents down the track?
I don't know. I mean, I think again that as far as the ability for the Bhopal plant to grasp a headline before the 40th anniversary coming up in 2024, I think I personally don't think that we're going to see that. It is stable, but it's still very dangerous and not fit for living. It's disappointing. It's just disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, I do understand, and there's a lot of things that people can say these days that we shouldn't have done this and we shouldn't have done that. But you're right. After DDT was basically ruled a no-go, Western societies expected greater productions. They still expected good yields on crops and that. And so that's why processes like this were put in place. But perhaps we didn't consider the totality of what happens if things go horribly wrong.
Right.
All right. Ken Bloch, I really do appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for helping us learn and for, reminding us about what happens when things aren't designed properly or aren't maintained properly and the possible consequences. For now, that's all we have time for, but I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thank you very much, Ken.
You're welcome, Tom. I appreciate you letting me come on the show today.
Thanks for listening to Health and Safety Conversations with Tom Bourne. Until next time, stay safe and enjoy the rest of your week.